All right. So yeah, I'm a CEO of CBD Spa. Probably know way too much about cannabis than anybody wants to know, because I just love studying this. Other than politics, cannabis is my main thing. But yeah, so just to go over what our panel is, it's the hemp entourage effect, cannabinoid, and terpene synergy. And as most people should know, hemp and cannabis are exactly the same thing. It's just based off politics and what they describe hemp as. So what the abstract is, it's advanced extraction and distillation techniques has provided a wide array of cannabis products with new methods continuing to emerge. These new technological advancements in cannabis processing have enabled a very potent compounds from isolated cannabinoids. This means that users can choose from CBD and THC only products to CBD THC mixtures containing specific ratios of each. But users who use to consume the product are with very high levels of an isolated compound will miss out on what's called the entourage effect, or the combined benefits of all cannabinoids and terpenes together. Consumption of a full spectrum of cannabinoids will produce a greater overall effect on the body than consumption of any single compound on its own. Now let's talk about the panelists. Jake, why don't you start off with yourself?
All right. Yeah, I'm Jake Black, and I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Treehouse Biotech, and I come from a organic chemistry, biochemistry background, and at Treehouse I kind of oversee our R&D on new cannabinoids or isolation of cannabinoids, as well as the formulations of our productions.
All right, Priyanka.
Hi, my name is Dr. Priyanka Sharma. I am a co-founder and co-CEO of Casmira. We're based out of Denver, Colorado. Co-founded the company with my husband, Pulak Sharma. This is our third year in business. We are a large manufacturer of THC-free CBD oil from industrial hemp. We have major contracts with farmers in Colorado to grow upwards of 500 acres each year, where we extract that biomass and turn it into CBD oil at our manufacturing facility. I focus a lot in the company on development of the technology, as well as training of new engineers and, of course, development of new products.
Eric?
Thanks, Brad. I'm Eric. Nice to see y'all. I am the Director of R&D for Extract Labs / Namaji. They're sister companies. Extract Labs makes supercritical CO2 extractors. We're pretty popular in that side of the business, and then once Wisconsin decided to go hemp, we decided to use our own machines and do it ourselves. So I help make our machines better, and on the extract side, and then on the Namaji side, I help separate cannabinoids, make THC-free full-spectrum hemp oil or broad-spectrum hemp oil, and formulation, analytics. So we do that all in-house, and we do white labeling and private labeling and all kinds of hemp products, and water soluble, and doing emulsion experiments and trying to figure out the best way to deliver these cannabinoids and terpenes. And then, of course, recreating the entourage effect is something I'm really interested in, and I'm really excited to talk about today.
Awesome. Janelle?
Thank you, Brad. So my name is Dr. Janelle Kim. I've seen a few of you. I've been talking since 10. Ultimately, I come to you with an extensive background in Eastern medicine, which is where hemp, stems back 4,000 years. So that means that I have studied and practiced both here in the United States and abroad in East Asia. I also co-founded our company, JBK Wellness Labs, our custom manufacturing company, with my husband, Craig Nandu, who was on a panel just before this. We came into the business before CBD industry was known with some of the pioneers of the industry. And they came to us for that very reason, that we have this understanding of herbal medicine and truly what CBD is and how to formulate properly. And we now manufacture here in the United States and Europe and Asia. And we create everything from dietary supplements, skincare, pain medicine, medicine for discomfort, and so on and so forth. But the most important thing I have to share, and what I am also very much looking forward to speaking to today on this understanding of entourage effect, because entourage effect, synergism, of course, hemp and CBD in and of themselves, and no cannabinoid system are all understandings and concepts that clearly parallel with Eastern medicine. So I'm very excited about all of these topics.
Awesome. So to start out, let's actually define what the entourage effect is. Mm-hmm. So introduced in 1998 by Ben Shabbat and Raphael Mechoulam to represent a novel endogenous cannabinoid molecule regeneration route. The phase refers to the compounds present in cannabis working in concert to create a more dynamic therapeutic effect. In essence, the medicinal impact of the whole plant, cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavonoids, is greater than the sum of its parts. So just as a note, I know a lot of us like to talk about the major cannabinoids of CBD and THC. However, THC does not have to be needed for the entourage effect. It's just a multiple mix of cannabinoids, terpenes, or flavonoids to create that entourage. So for each panelist, what have been each of your experiences with the effects of isolated cannabinoids and in an entourage of compounds? Has there been a focus area for the route of application for your studies? Jake?
Yeah, so kind of breaking that down of, you have this complex mixture of, hundreds, if not thousands of different types of molecules all in presence, and then removing one can change the whole effect of it, much less, removing two, adding one or two. And so in each combination of those, you have literally infinite possibilities of formulation. And so from our side at Treehouse, we've been focusing on a kind of partitioning out, not only CBD, but also the CBG and CBC. We're primarily focused on those because they're the next kind of most abundant cannabinoids in the plant, and I think that's why a lot of people are focused on those. But there's, so we really approach it from the cannabinoid side, and then once you have those kind of separated, you can then reformulate at specific ratios, and with that, then you can do more controlled formulations of, 50% CBD, 1% CBG, 1% CBC, and so you're not dependent on every single extract being at some arbitrary ratio. And so that's how we've really approached it from a formulation and kind of processing standpoint.
Priyanka?
So I'll speak about this from a product perspective. Casmira is a B2B business, so finished product manufacturers will leverage our raw materials to produce their finished differentiated products. When we started our business, mostly we were producing CBD isolate. It was very popular. And there were very few manufacturers that utilized our THC-free CBD oil. What we see now is the opposite, and that's what you have said, which is there's a very special technique to actually being able to use CBD isolate or an isolated cannabinoid in a finished product. It's probably easier to make a finished product with the oil, and that's why we see folks now moving towards CBD oils or a full spectrum or a broad spectrum, whatever you want to call it. It's likely easier to use that in a formulation. It's actually very difficult to figure out how to incorporate a CBD isolate, a CBG isolate, because you have a specific dosage form, but it's a powder, and it's not necessarily going to blend at certain concentration in finished goods.
Absolutely. Eric?
I do a lot of the same types of formulations as they do, and it's until we have defined the effects of all the various players in the entourage effect, using full spectrum distillate is a great way to try to achieve that until we have studied the exponential possibilities of each terpene and cannabinoid with each other. I mean, it is an exponential equation that just is going to take a really long time. Until we can do that, we can use full spectrum and get those flavonoids as well, because those co-distill and they're in there to some degree, as well as the heavy terpenes, triterpenes, and sterols. But we still, even if you have full spectrum hemp distillate, you still have to add back the terpenes. And you can either take the cannabis-derived terpenes, which is then you're just kind of shrugging, okay, we know that a certain cultivar like let's say sour diesel has a certain, and we hate to use strain names now because it's based on chemotyping, but we can generally say, okay, we're going to have this kind of effect if we add back those cannabis-derived terpenes. Or you can try to take, a measured approach and specifically add isolated terpenes, and that's more, even though it's less in vogue right now, it's more of a calculated approach than just putting back extracted cannabis-derived terpenes, which may have been adulterated in the process because it usually takes heat, and you're not going to get the exact profile of monoterpenes and sesquiterpenes that were in the plant itself in the beginning. So it's a challenge both ways, and we try to use both approaches.
Jenna?
Okay. We also manufacture using isolate and full spectrum, broad spectrum. There are, from a practical perspective, there are certainly times where CBD isolate is the best way to go, because some people cannot take full spectrum, simply put, because they have drug tests at their work and they cannot. Okay, there you go. As an herbologist, let me take it from the other side, right? So 4,000 years ago, 2700 BC, Emperor Shen Nung, who's known as the divine farmer, he's basically the very first herbologist, doctor, whatever you want to call it, Eastern, Western, it doesn't make a difference, whoever started learning and studying about plants and understanding how it affects the human body, right? It was one of the 50 fundamental herbs. Hemp was one of the 50 fundamental herbs of medicine, okay? And so way back then, they took the plant and they crushed it up and they put it with wine and they drank it or they applied it topically. Back then, they didn't even think about such things, right? CBD, CBG, terpenes, flavonoids. It all is very, very important. But I do always, like I say, I like to kind of root back to the understanding of this medicine, this plant, all of the healing powers. It's part of this, the entourage effect to myself. What I like, the first phrase I like to use is whole plant medicine. And that's very important to understand, right? So there's many principles and concepts that can surround this. Adaptogenic medicine, for example, is something that the Western culture has come to understand. And I like that example because it helps us understand a little bit more how herbs work for the human body, right? Adaptogenic medicine looks at the fact that this plant, right, kind of like wine, this grape, certain botanicals grow for the environment at a certain place with certain powers of the environment, climate, you name it. And through their very own livelihood and how they grow strong to become a plant, herbologists look at that centuries ago, and they started to think, okay, this plant was able to survive in this, so when we start to utilize it, those same survival mechanisms, this is a little more broad, right? When we put it into our body, it helps us in that way. But every part of that plant does that. That's why, in one sense, we have to, no matter what we decide to use, like I said, we also manufacture with isolate because there's very appropriate times for that. But in general, that whole plant medicine, that's where you have all of those components working together to create the most healing properties of that plant. Mm-hmm.
So I actually have a follow-up question, and any one of you guys can answer this. So from your guys' experience, would it be better to, for at least right now with the regulations that are in place, to have a single isolate like CBD with an entourage of terpenes? Or would it be better to have an entourage of minor cannabinoids with that? Would that help better? Which would help better, like a mixture of minor cannabinoids with CBD or CBD itself, which is an entourage of terpenes?
I guess I'll pitch in here, like, I think the short answer is we don't know, right? And I think that's what I always try to highlight of, CBD plus terpenes is one thing that if you want to study it medicinally, great, you can do that, but that has to be a specific exact formulation of exactly what terpenes, what ratios, plus what ratio of CBD. So then if you want to do CBD plus one terpene, then that whole thing has to be studied by itself, or CBD plus, say, CBG. That has to be studied by itself to truly understand what that mixture is doing. And so that's kind of how there is no real answer from a scientifically validated standpoint, and each mixture is going to have to be studied.
Anyone else want to add on that?
I think we have a lot of work to do, and it just became more apparent when the study came out just last week about showing that the entourage effect is more complicated than we ever thought it would be. We were hoping that would be on the receptor level, kind of like how CBD is a negative allosteric modulator of the CB1 receptor, and that's why it will help you bring you down if you're too high. It's an anxiolytic also. And that's a really simple model to measure because you can grow cell lines with those receptors in it and then measure basal signaling levels and whether there's an increase or decrease or suppression or activation. And this study, this group down in Australia did this with 5 major terpenes: linalool, limonene, myrcene, beta-caryophyllene. And they saw no allosteric modulation at the CB1 and CB2 receptors, which they're saying, well, does this mean there's no entourage effect? They pose the question, but obviously they're not negating that there's something going on. It's just way more complicated than we ever thought it could be to study and measure in a scientific lab setting. So that's kind of daunting, knowing that simple cell lines aren't going to solve the answer to how is linalool being a sedative or myrcene or pinene. Pinene, we know it's kind of, we have a good idea of pinene and how it inhibits this enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. So it helps cognition because you have those more neurotransmitters and they're not being uptaken back into the body. And it's kind of like similarly how we have these enzymes in our endocannabinoid system which breaks down anandamide and 2-AG. So that there's this intricate dance and cascades that if you inhibit one downstream enzyme, you'll have an increase in your endogenous cannabinoids or in this case, maybe terpenes. So I think it's really complicated.
Yeah, and how complex our actual endocannabinoid system is, because we have more than just our CB1 and CB2 receptors that connect to our endocannabinoid system. There are multiple receptors throughout the body that are not just those. Do you guys want to touch on a couple of those receptors?
I want to touch on the endocannabinoid system.
Perfect.
So the endocannabinoid system, right? Like I said when I first introduced myself, I'm so excited to see that this is a topic of ours because I will kind of speak on it in more of a general understanding, right? The endocannabinoid system we hear is all about homeostasis, right? And so when I go and speak, I often talk about that. We talk all the time about balancing our minds and bodies, but do we really know what that means? So when it comes to CBD and its effect, regardless of, we have to note, and certainly we will get into the conversation of the receptors, CB1 are in your brain, CB2 are all throughout your body, all of them basically are affected by CBD. And that's an interesting point I kind of spoke on a little bit earlier in the day. One of the reasons why CBD and hemp is such a powerful herbal ingredient, right, is that it is able to make our body function properly. Understand that any medicine would agree that in order to have true health, beauty, wellness, whatever it is that you're looking to achieve, the number one thing you have to do is make your body function properly. And that doesn't necessarily mean sometimes what happens is we take things that force our body to do something. We're in pain, we take a medicine that forces our brain chemistry to change in such a way that our hormones react, and then we're able to kind of alleviate the pain for a while. Sleep does the same. One of the beautiful things about CBD, the whole full spectrum, whatever we want to discuss, let's just look at it as the plant, is that it starts, the way it affects the endocannabinoid is that it actually balances the endocannabinoid system. So it supplements that so that everything functions properly. Does that make sense? And that's why, for example, CBD with sleep we talked about. A lot of times you would think, how in the world, CBD is more of a stimulant actually by nature, right? It makes you more alert. So how is it helping them with sleep? Well, that or any other powerful herbal ingredient that can balance the body, it goes in with the receptors, CB1, CB2, for whatever condition you're looking for, but what it does is it affects that actual system to bring balance. So, hence, that's how I would explain the endocannabinoid system in a minute.
Anyone want to add on that?
Okay.
Okay, cool. So, so I'll go with this next question with Eric and Jake. So with your guys' expertise in the isolation extraction and your work in formulation, why did both of you guys choose to focus on isolation extraction to formulate with and not broad spectrum extraction?
So I kind of touched on it in one of my previous answers, but I think it's because you can then control the levels of, cannabinoids, and if you want a consistent formulation, you can't, again, there's benefits to both. If you're making an extract from a specific strain and that specific strain has a chemotype that you're interested in, whether it's terpenes or cannabinoid ratios, that's great and that's, a useful thing. But from the other side, if you want a very controlled, product that you can, get a SKU on and all of those actual kind of regulatory things, you have to be able to say there's X% CBG, X% THC, X% CBD, and that has to be consistent across the line. And so by isolating and kind of then controlling those ratios manually, you get that sort of consistent from a kind of a direct scientific approach.
Eric?
Yes, absolutely. From a manufacturing approach as well, you have control of your product. You need to have a reproducible product, and with isolates you can do that. with the variability in starting material, you cannot guarantee that you'll have the same cannabinoid, flavonoid profiles lot after lot. And in large-scale manufacturing, you have to have that control. And so also from a scientific approach, you can do, the scientific method and vary one thing at a time. If you do too many things, if you have too many things going on, everything is convoluted and there's no control, and you can't draw any conclusions. So starting simple and doing one thing at a time and having data, okay, we can basically get a terpene profile with a gas chromatogram and quantify those major ones that we want to include. Now, there's all these little peaks in the GC, especially downstream in the sesquiterpenes, that are just really hard to identify. You'd have to buy hundreds of standards, okay? And some of these aren't even available from an analytical standard lab. They're coming out with more and more every day. This industry is such a boom. You see this industry driving all these other sectors, like I was speaking about yesterday of centrifugal partitioning chromatography. Wasn't even nobody wanted it until last few years in separating cannabinoids. Now they've scaled up to industrial scale, and they're making $2 million centrifuges, which is pretty insane, in a good way. And same thing with analytical standard companies. It's like I get email alerts. New, we got a standard for this terpene or this cannabinoid. So it's really pushing the industry, and I think we need that in order to do this scientific approach.
Actually, may I speak on that real quickly? Just a second here. As my fellow peer manufacturers do know, I love that you brought that up. It's a topic I have not been able to touch on yet, so taking this chance. Testing is, as Eric just said, is certainly something that the whole industry has to catch up with. The thing is that there's certain standardized testings out there. As the consumer and as the person, if you're looking to manufacture, it's important to understand. We constantly have to follow that because of what was just explained. It's so important when you're creating products, right? But we have to also remember that we're creating so many, especially from a formulation and product development standpoint, we're creating so many new formulations that the testing standard is not even there yet. So sometimes people get confused. Oh no, we did this test, or why can't you test for this? It's because there's not even a test that can test for that yet, right? I even personally had, okay, I shouldn't go into too much of a sign out, but like the MyHeritage at 23andMe. It was like this is what I can explain. I went to do that, right? And so I'm Korean and all these types of things. I know for a fact I'm Korean. I went to one company to test myself to see what my DNA was for fun, and it came back and I wasn't even Korean. And I was like, okay, people. So then I looked, I know I am, and I had to find another testing company that in fact had samples, more East Asian samples, I almost had like a mid to midlife crisis, And then I did it, and certainly I was like 50% Korean and all the other European on my mother's side. But just to keep that in mind, really important. It just hasn't caught up with us yet. So I love that you said that.
So from the isolation standpoint, what is the myth and reality with THC removal and tea-free products?
I don't know if you wanted to touch on that, but
Anybody can touch on that from the panel.
What is the myth? The myth is that it's THC free. Well, I'd say, until you see a test result, assume that it's mythological, because a lot of times they're wrong, and you can look at an in-house COA, but it's not coming from a third-party lab. So just make sure, if you're banking thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions of dollars on a batch of tea-free distillate, you better make sure that it really is tea-free. So the reality is, sadly, that some of it isn't, and it could test hot, and you can have a recall, and that's bad news. What are some other myths?
yeah,
I can go. Oh,
no.
no, Go ahead.
I insist. I've already been talking.
Priyanka, how about you go?
Sure, I'll touch base on this. So Casmira is in the business of THC removal. That's our, premier product. It's called Imperial Oil. It's a standard oil that we produce with a minimum of 80% CBD purity, and we call it THC free. And what we mean when we say that is THC is at a non-detectable level, so non-detectable by analytical instruments. And where this becomes important is in the finished good, and we always have to think about what happens in the finished product. Now, in Colorado, I'm specifically speaking for the state of Colorado, we have a legal limit of 0.3% of THC in the finished good. And a lot of marketing companies have chosen to call that as THC free and not compliant level of THC. There's a big difference with that. And what you'll find is, and I'm sure Jake can speak to this as well, in finished products that contain 0.3% THC, if you add up the amount of THC in that finished product, it could be a 60 ml tincture, so 2-ounce tincture, there is actually quite a lot of THC, upwards of 30 or 40 milligrams per finished product. And what we see is when folks are not following the instructions on those finished products that take a certain amount of servings per day, you could actually be intaking a lot more THC than you would even be thinking about. And at that point, maybe you might as well have taken a marijuana product, but it was actually derived from hemp. Yeah. So this is where THC-free or non-detectable THC is really important, when you're very serious about making a finished good that is going to contain no traces of THC.
Absolutely. I think we actually had this conversation before the panel. We were walking by, we were like, well, if we took an entire bottle of supposedly 0.3% THC, would it actually give us some type of cognitive high if we took the entire bottle?
Yeah, and that's kind of, I think, a useful metaphor there is like, if you drink one beer, there's, 6% alcohol. But if you drink a whole case of beer, like, you get really drunk. And so it's the same thing. So if there is THC there, it's just, it's additive in that sense. And yeah, the limit of detection, I think, for most labs at this point is roughly 0.1%. So that's 3 times less than the 0.3. You can detect a molecule at like parts per trillion. Like, you can do all this work. And so to be truly free is, that you have to just get into nitty-gritty chemistry. But yeah, below 0.1% is kind of what's standard as considered THC free. It won't test for it. And yeah, and then I think it's kind of important too in a lot of products that are THC free. There's different ways you can get to that through different chemical processing steps. But in a lot of those ways, you end up losing a lot of this entourage effect, right? So and a lot of people will take an oil, a distillate that has too much THC in it, and they'll just add other oils to it, and then they dilute that level down to the 0.3 or undetectable, and that's great. But that dilution dilutes everything. So, if it's CBG and CBC or some terpenes that are kind of maybe more rare, and you want those in your product as well, and then it's been diluted, so now you're missing out on the whole entourage effect in that sense. And so it's important as well to, with your THC-free products or, anything you're sourcing, just make sure that, you get what you want and what you pay for. So if you're paying for a full spectrum product that's THC-free, you want to make sure those other molecules are there so you get the full spectrum or broad spectrum. So
For sure. And I think this also comes down to a regulatory standpoint because, there's really no restriction on what we can consider T-free or THC-free. Because you can even walk through some of these booths and they say, oh, we're T-free, but it's plus or minus less than 0.3% THC, which is basically a legal limit anyway. So what the hell is T3 if you're going to state that, but yet that's the legal limit. So we just, once again, it's just getting through standardization of what CBD actually is and how the hemp process is going to be moving forward now that we have some sort of legalization. So Dr. Ken.
Yes.
Let's talk about your products a little bit for skincare products, because that is one thing that actually is legal, or topicals. Side note, I like to say this in every panel. Please just be cognizant. The FDA has said that they do not allow tinctures, edible products, dietary supplements right now until they figure out what the hell's going on. So who knows what's happening? That probably won't even happen for the next year. So just be cognizant of it. There are people that are selling it in stores, but who knows? It's a gray area, just like how Prop 215 was in California. yes, they are okay with it, but at any time they can kick down your door and take all your stuff. That's just reality. So, Dr. Kim, with your topical products, what have been some of the challenges of cannabinoid penetration for these topical products since they are a lipid-based molecule, and has an entourage of terpenes helped with this penetration?
So, that's correct. Topical is definitely, we're safe, completely safe. Don't we love that? And actually, we manufacture in Europe, and that's basically one of the best ways that we're able to bring these types of products into Europe at the moment, right? Through these types of topical applications. Now, in answer to your question, it is true that the skin is very hard to permeate, right? It's hard to get things through your skin into your bloodstream. I also say on the flip side that we always have to remember that our skin is our largest organ, and whatever you put on it, right? I have to say this even if it has nothing to do with the rest of my answer. Whatever you put on your body literally goes into your body. So how many of us take such good care? We eat right, we do like exercise, and we take care of ourselves, but then we go and we rub a whole bunch of chemicals all over our body. Doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's because there's just because, let's say the CBD, let's stick to CBD skincare topically for a second. It's true, it's hard to permeate the skin and get into your bloodstream. That is an accurate fact. But when it comes to CBD skincare, for example, the main point is to have CBD get to those receptors to help balance the endocannabinoid system. In that sense, it absolutely gets absorbed in the correct manner, right? So you put it on topically. We create many different types of products, the salves, the roll-on, so on and so forth. So it's true, you have to put on a good amount of it. But one other thing that we do, kind of a macrocosm of this understanding of an entourage effect. Just like I said, that affects one individual ingredient, it also goes into formulation, and that is herbal formulation, right? Knowing how to properly make dosages of certain ingredients that help them to enhance their function, neutralize their function, so on and so forth. So what we do, for example, with skincare to help that delivery system even further is that we incorporate other proper formulations of herbal ingredients that basically embraces the CBD and gets that much further into your body and often helps with certain specific functions. For example, muscle and joint discomfort. We'll create salves and put in certain herbal ingredients at proper dosages that create a beautiful delivery system that goes specifically towards alleviating your discomfort.
And just to clarify on that
Yes.
for the audience, so terpenes are basically in just about any herbal ingredient, and that's what provides that type of entourage, is doing that, because essentially terpenes are just a fancy word for essential oils.
Right.
So that's basically what you're utilizing, are those terpenes from those herbal medications to help with that entourage effect of the cannabinoids.
Yes and no. Herbal ingredients in and of themselves, sorry, Eric, I definitely want to hear what you have to say, but I have to say, herbal ingredients in and of themselves, a ginseng plant, I assure you it's not just the terpene profile that allows that ginseng to be $250,000 on your herb store down the street, because it helps to rebalance such incredible imbalances of one's condition. Every herbal ingredient from an Eastern medical and herbal medicine perspective has powerful properties within it that basically help to balance your condition, from digestive disorders to sleep disorders to pain to skincare, so on and so forth. So certainly that's a part of it, and I'll let Eric speak here, but there's a lot more to each ingredient than terpenes.
Yeah, there's so many possibilities with all these great herbs that you use in skincare. But even within the cannabis plant alone, there's terpenes that are just perfectly suited for topicals. Like some terpenes, and they might test for these in your lab. You could get some pretty high levels of neurolidol, which is skin permeation agent, as well as, I think, bisabolol. And these are two of the, I'd say, the major 20 terpenes in the cannabis plant. So it's pretty awesome that these are right there in the plant already, and you don't have to really go to other sources. Neurolidol is the main component in bitter orange, neroli, and so that's the cool thing about terpenes. Right. A lot of times the names describe exactly where they're found most prevalently. And it's just, you gotta, but I think using them effectively, you have to know when to say when with these levels of skin penetration agents, because sometimes you don't want to go into the bloodstream, because that just clears the body of it. You want it to stay in your skin cells. You're not trying to get a systematic effect of CBD when you put on a topical. You just want it to stay in the skin, and so you have to get it into the subcutaneous level, but you want it to stay there without going into the bloodstream. And that's what people like Janelle do so well, and really appreciate the work they do. It's great.
So I actually do have one more thing I want to cover with Dr. Sharma, because I think this is awesome with nanoparticles. So with your research on these nanoparticles and ligands, they're fascinating. So how is your research correlated with the chemical compounds of cannabis, hemp, and their entourage aspects?
Sure, Brad. So in my PhD, I did molecular modeling of the interaction of nanoparticles and lipid bilayer membranes. Subsequently, after I got my degree, I received a SBIR grant from the NSF to look at molecular modeling of chiral compounds and how that can be used to leverage a method development on HPLC or other sort of analytical methods so these compounds can be resolved. Now, it turns out that many cannabinoids are also chiral, which means that the molecule has optical isomers or enantiomers, as we like to call them. So where this becomes important is formulas that are produced synthetically will contain a single enantiomer. Formulas that are produced naturally, like an extract from a plant, those will contain both optical isomers or enantiomers. So for instance, the North American industrial hemp variety, when that's extracted, it contains minus delta 9 THC. That's the single enantiomer of THC that it contains. However, if you produce THC or a cannabinoid extract synthetically, it will contain both forms, plus and minus. Now, where this becomes important was a case of a drug called thalidomide, where they found that one of the enantiomers of thalidomide was actually harmful to women, while the other was being used to just treat morning sickness. And this is really important because we see this a lot now where there's different cannabinoid formulas and different products coming into the United States that either they're produced outside of the States, they're produced in the States, but they're produced synthetically. And what we do at Casmira, using our analytical lab and using our molecular modeling capabilities, is trying to understand whether these compounds do show different enantiomers and how can we resolve them to show that these compounds are produced synthetically. One thing we do want to avoid is our customer base, or just customers in general, consumers in general in the United States, not taking product that may be harmful to them. And what we want to be able to do eventually is produce a white paper where we can show that we have resolved different cannabinoids, including THC, in synthetically derived formulas.
And to jump in from a chemistry standpoint for the audience, she mentioned the enantiomers, and it's not super important to go into the real difference, but I think the important aspect of that is that there's really no way to distinguish the two. They're mirror images is essentially what it is, but they're chemically identical, boiling point, melting point, spectroscopically, normal chromatography methods, all of those things, they behave identically, and so it's remarkable that biology can just make, essentially all of biology has this chiral component, and it's very selective and specific, and that's why the other mirror image, though you couldn't determine it using most methods, could be very different. And so it's very important, and it's a cool chemical concept if you're interested in learning more. But yeah, that's why it's important.
Good deal. Anybody want to add anything before we go into audience questions? All right. Anybody have any questions?
When you were speaking about
Yes.
the skincare,
Yes.
what effects are you seeing with the topical skincare?
Okay, so the most.
You need a full spectrum product in that skincare.
Got it. So I will, the second part of the question, the full spectrum aspect, I kind of will revert back to my original conversation. I will always prefer that because of my very understanding and principled in the whole plant medicine and all of the benefits. What kind of effects? that can be a very general question because we make a lot of, for example, when it comes to actually skincare, because I believe that's what you're asking. So I come before the CBD industry. We come from the natural product industry, right? So we created skincare formulations for Four Seasons, Ritz-Carlton's, all of, all these types of spas, Whole Foods, so on and so forth. But that's important to understand the spa regimen because that's how we go about creating our formulas, the whole skincare regimen. The cleanser, to the exfoliator, to the mask, toner, serum, moisturizer, right? It's like I could sleep and talk about that.
The central dogma of skincare.
Thank you. That's a great way of putting it. So in answer to your question is, CBD in and of itself, some of the main functions are they're anti-inflammatory. It's known to be an anti-inflammatory. It's known to have great antioxidant type of effects, right? It really helps the skin to function. There I go again. And so what we do, though, with our skincare is that we follow the proper formulation methods. And so we'll take CBD and we will do what I said. We'll put it into my family's lineage, Bebong formulas, okay? And what happens is when you take CBD and you put it in a proper formulation of other herbal ingredients, then you start to direct the function. So that's the true answer to so the cleanser, we put in purifying ingredients to help purify the skin. The exfoliator to help resurface and clear the dead skin cells so that new ones can come up. Toner, serum, moisturizer starts to make the nourishment, revitalize skin cells, hydrate. So each one has a separate function, but in general. Yes?
Next. There's a microphone coming your way.
That's what I was
My question's kind of not clear yet, so pardon me if I'm shaky. There seemed to be a dichotomy between this whole plant approach, this sort of scientific, molecular, we need to study and understand this. Now, it's clear that that's necessary for those who are of us who are producing products, regulations, regulatory concerns, but I'm really trying to understand what is the endocannabinoid system, and is it, in that sense, can we start to visualize it as something close to the endocrine system? Looking at Eastern medicine, is it something more like the meridians of Qi, where there are physical locations in the body, where these things are, or is there some potential where now we're having Eastern medicine married to Western medicine, more holistic approaches? Is there some potential for that approach to help us overcome this stigmatization of THC and cannabis and all of that?
Who wants to take that?
Make sense?
I can just throw in my, 2 cents on the scientific kind of, we'll call it Western approach of it. I think, there's certainly, absolutely real effects from all sorts of, Eastern medicine, herbs, and, all of those things can be real and have real scientific effects that can be documented and studied. I think from the Western side of, we'll call it that way, that you can only study, right, the whole scientific method is change one variable and then observe conclusion, change variable 2, observe conclusion, and that's the way it progresses, and that's the way you get, scientifically validated conclusions. And so when you're dealing with a mixture of 100, 1,000 different molecules and different ratios, the only way to perform that method is to change one thing, get a conclusion, and progress. And it's very slow, and it's going to take 20 years before, it's going to take hundreds of years probably to piece it all out, but that's just how you have to approach it from that sort of the scientific method.
My answer is, thank you for that, Jake, is it's funny. You can look at it as a dichotomy, right? 2 separate things. Or you can look at it as one whole, right? So if we look at the symbol of yin and yang, I'm certainly not going to go into a whole spiel on yin and yang right now, but let's start there for a second, because it's my mission. My very mission is doing exactly what you're talking about, sitting up here. I am a living example of East and West. Literally, my father's Korean, my mother's American, right? Or European, whatever you want to call it. And so to me, there's absolutely a place for both. And as a practitioner for my patients, to me, as a practitioner, a doctor, it would be horrific to not look at everything around you and utilize what's the best thing for that patient. Western medicine, as far as technology, advancement, research, you need that, and it's so important. But then understanding, which is where I keep going back, the root of where everything comes from, understanding the human mind and body, that's also just as important, just like that yin-yang symbol. You need both, right? And that's what creates, it's a constant balance, and that's how I could answer that. So it's more of a principle-based answer, but I hope that can conclude that a little bit.
Anybody want to add that for the next question? Okay. Next question. Push it on over. Yeah.
Hi. My question is basically, full spectrum could mean so many things. What would people in the industry have to agree upon to come up with a common definition of, if not full spectrum, different terpene profiles?
Well, I don't think really anything is truly full spectrum based on the laws. But
I would say that it's just like one of those things we just have to agree on a definition, right? Like it can be anything, right? Full spectrum doesn't mean anything scientifically or regulatory, right? There is no accepted definition of that. So if we all agree it contains 5 terpenes and 3 cannabinoids and fatty acids, that's full spectrum. Sure, like it's an arbitrary definition, but that's all that needs to happen, in my opinion, is an agreement on what the definition is.
I'm going to add to that real quick. I think where the confusion has started in the space leads back to the biomass, and I think Jake can probably agree with us that even from a single farm that is planting one type of seed, there may be different spots in the farm that have different industrial hemp that's actually being cultivated from that same plot. And so what we see as an extraction company, and I think every extraction company in this space sees the same thing as us, each time you're using a different plant material, maybe even the same plant material, you're going to produce a raw material or oil that has a different terpene profile, slightly different cannabinoid profile. So the standardization needs to probably go back to the biomass. And in Colorado, as far as my understanding, farmers are limited to certain seeds that they're able to cultivate the industrial hemp from. Is there going to be a standardization of industrial hemp that's grown in the U.S.? Are we going to continue to be crossing genetics between industrial hemp and marijuana and thereby producing plants with different cannabinoids and different terpene profiles? So when I look at it, it's a problem that's much more upstream, which starts with the plant material.
Just like each one of us, right? So every single one of us has a different DNA matrix, right? Each one of us is different. Well, the same thing occurs, as Priyanka just said beautifully, in the plant. And so that shouldn't surprise us. Like, what? No, look around. We're all literally different in every way. Well, the plants have that too, and that's actually the beautiful part of the medicine. So.
And I agree with Priyanka. We need standardization in this industry more than anything. I think analytical methods haven't been standardized. I mean, there are some chemistry groups in ISTM, and they're establishing analytical methods for the AOAC, which governs this is how you test for pesticides, for example. We need to apply those to the cannabis industry and also standardize the definitions of what full spectrum is. Just because you add terpenes back and maybe you added the same cannabis-derived terpenes to that distillate, is that full spectrum? Did you add the same concentration factor of the terpenes to the distillate, or did you add just a little less or just a little more? Is it augmented hemp oil, or is it full spectrum, or is it, because terpenes are only present in about at a dry weight 1% of the plant. So you should really not add more than 8% or 10% of terpenes if you want to really keep it to the same proportions as it was in the plant. So you add too much, then you're kind of like, playing with the spectrum. And so we need to define what that is and, come up with a consensus.
We got time for one more question. All right, my man.
So I understand that it makes sense to me that there's an entourage effect. But at the same time, I struggle with the idea. I can see what you're saying. Well, we do this amount of CBD with this amount of terpenes and multiple combinations where you can actually figure out what the entourage effect is. But I mean, when I look at it now, it's hypothetical. There's no real data on it. I mean, there's 20,000 cannabis articles, and there's like 20 on entourage effect. So it seems to me entourage effect right now is especially when you get into oils where the spectrum changes based on how they're harvested, then it's really just a marketing thing. Because we don't really know anything about it. I mean, we're really looking for the active ingredients in phytoceuticals that, in a sense, are drugs. I mean, that's what we're looking for. We look for, salicin in white willow bark for aspirin, and we look at curcumin and turmeric for its anti-inflammatory properties. So, to me, it just seems like it's a marketing thing.
I would kind of say that, yeah, this comes back to the same point of we just need a definition that is agreed upon, right? So is the entourage effect, what is the specific definition? Is it that one cannabinoid versus a full plant extract or whatever has a different effect? Then sure, like that can be the definition, and we can talk about they are not identical, so that can be the entourage effect. But is it that, this full plant extract has this specific effect that, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but again, you have to have a definition, you have to be able to talk about it. And so right now, I think it's thrown around a lot as a marketing term. I agree with that. But it is also, there are scientific studies that show CBD by itself and then a full plant extract compared in the same lab rats, there was a different effect. And so if we want to just say that that's it, that's fine too. But again, to me, it's a definition thing. Yeah.
So there's a bunch of studies on CBD, there's a bunch of studies on THC in humans,
Mm-hmm.
specific doses.
Yeah.
Entourage effect, I guess, can be with some like satellites, right? It's THC and certain combination of CBD.
Yeah.
So again, there's not really, it's neat, I think there's an entourage effect,
Yeah.
but there's just not really data. So if you're really looking to produce a product that could be effective, you would want to look at the data that's out there as far as clinical studies.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. Again, from that perspective, that there's no definition, so it can mean whatever you want it to mean.
I
right?
think
So.
I think that the way that we define entourage effect might be analogous to the recent new way of thinking as how we define chemotypes of strains. Through interbreeding, the strains that used to have a specific characteristic have been lost, and it's kind of all been diluted. So we don't like to use strain names anymore, and we'd rather go off data and chemotype. And I think we might end up going towards that same direction when we try to define, okay, this effect, okay, this entourage effect, and it's going to be specific indicators, relates to this full spectrum oil, which has its own chemotype. And we might need, that could be, I don't know if that's a long-term solution, but it could be a stopgap measure until we have all these myriad of possibilities defined, which is going to take a long time, like Jake said.
If I may say, that's why I appreciate that question. And that's why for myself, I like to start by thinking of it as whole plant medicine, which is something that's existed through the test of time, right? And so what I like to think of to help me kind of sometimes clear my mind and look at it from a different perspective. Let's take it out of hemp for a second, right? And then kind of work backwards. There's something called ma huang in Chinese medicine, ephedra, right? And so ephedra, let me tell you, as a practitioner, is one of the most powerful ingredients in a proper formulation to help asthma, right? So here I have children with asthma conditions, and the most perfect ingredient when used correctly to help them feel better, children. But someone decided to take ephedrine, right, out of that whole plant and utilize it for their marketing purposes. There's the word that you just used, right? And all of a sudden it got out of hand. So like I said, we're kind of going in a different direction looking at exactly what you said, right? And so now you have ephedrine that now people had to get shut down because it was harming everyone's body because that one component of this whole plant was utilized in a manner it wasn't supposed to be. It was taken out of our medicine that treats children with asthma, right? So just another way. So certainly when it comes to whole plant medicine, that's why I like to think of entourage effect, kind of take it back a step, and if you look at it as really principally what we're talking about, not necessarily as a marketing phrase, that is what, certainly when I speak of entourage effect, that's where I'm coming from, if that's helpful at all. There's something to say about that whole plant and all those when they all come together to work for such an incredible condition to be able to affect versus taking out one piece of it, using it for something else that is not supposed to be used at and harming people. So another way, another perspective.
Yeah, and I think the major point is, we're still in a new emerging market. We're still trying to figure out a lot of things that are going on. Yes, hemp has been around for thousands of years.
Right.
However, we're still coming back to this present sense of what exactly is this doing for us and how do we define this correctly. So with this market specifically, we need to be more cognizant as a consumer and as a business owner what exactly these processes are and that we're doing these correctly and we're teaching people that are consuming this product the right things and how to do the right things correctly, because we just cannot take anything at face value, unlike a lot of legal entities that we see today.
Yeah. I think education's huge. Like that's I think why we're all up here and we're giving you honest answers and saying like we just want everyone to know because it helps all of us as business owners, and then it helps consumers because you need to know what we're talking about. And when you can read anything online in a blog post that tells you what the entourage effect is or what CBD does or what CBN does, like that's not you need education.
So unfortunately I can't take any more questions. I think I'm out of time, but thank you all so much, panelists. You guys are awesome. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate you guys staying, and